What's going on, everybody? Mr. Danny here again with another project build for you. Today I'm going to show you how I built a push block. More specifically, a fancy push block. Why would I do that? How much time do you got? First of all these YouTubers with their fancy push blocks thrown at my face, and I just wanted to make one of my own. It's basically it. It's like the only reason why. So here you go. This is a 3-ply push block that I made out of walnut and red Balau. And look at those colors, man. I don't know how one tree can produce all of these colors, but to me it doesn't seem fair, personally. But look at that. Walnut on the outsides and red Balau in the middle. You can see the little plies there. The handle was modeled after one of my planes. That's a Stanley No. 6, and it feels great. I even added some finger scallops in there, and it is nice and comfy and gives me a solid grip. Works great. So if you are interested in the nits and grits on how I made this, keep watching, because I'm about to show you. So I say nits and grits, but this video is actually pretty condensed. There's just too much footage to go through, and I'm trying to shoot for around 10 minutes, but I keep going over every time. So let me know if there's any part of the process that you'd rather see more or less of, and I'll try to make some adjustments there. So you can see here I'm just shaving off a little bit of these blocks of red Balau. I needed it to be a little bit thinner for what I was using it for, and it just ended up being too thick, so I had to shave a little bit off. And here I'm just laying them out to do a glue up, just end to end, and by itself it's actually not very strong at all, but the way that I layered them together with the walnut, it actually ended up being pretty strong. But I don't think I would end up building anything that was going to be used like this just by itself, because that joint is pretty weak and I had to be careful with it even after it was glued up. So I'm just getting the second one here. There were 2 boards that I glued up that I ended up gluing together down the middle. You'll see later the 2 lengths here I run it over to the jointer, flatten it out, and then I glue the 2 of those together to make a bigger board. And here I'm just starting to process some pieces of walnut to make some boards for the glue up that I need for the outsides. Really just getting 2 flat edges here and then taking everything over to the table saw. As you can see, I couldn't show you everything here just because there was too much footage, but I went through this process with all of the boards here, and then I used my miter gauge to basically use as a reference point to move my fence to and give me a consistent width for all of these smaller boards that I was cutting off of the walnut pieces. So you can see here, now that the red Balau is all glued up, I ran it over to the jointer and flattened both faces and one of the edges on both of these boards here to give me a good surface to glue to. So you can see here that I started gluing up one of the walnut panels. This is the lighter of the 2. I can't believe this is walnut, but I arranged the colors in a way that kind of looks like a sunset to me, but I thought it turned out pretty cool here. But I'm just using a extra shallow like bench hook that I built to glue all this up here, I had a little bit of trouble with it. I had to use a weight to keep down that that bottom brace that I clamped to, but it ended up working out for both of the panels. So it actually made it a little bit easier. So here I'm just gluing up the red Balau together here to create that core in the middle. And here is the second walnut panel, the darker of the two, and using the bench hook again, since I had some decent results the first time around. And once they were glued up, I brought the darker of the two boards to the miter saw just to square off the ends there. And then I'm starting to plane these down, trying to get them flat. I actually had quite a bit of trouble here too. Turns out I was not sharp at all on my irons, and I needed to sharpen them up first. But fortunately, it didn't matter as much just because this was the inside of the glue up, so nothing was going to be seen here, but I did end up getting quite a bit of tear out. I sanded everything down after that just to get everything nice and flat and give it a good surface to glue and adhere to. And this is where I ended up gluing all of the pieces together. This was a little nerve-wracking. Wasn't really sure how this was going to go or if I even had enough clamps, but it obviously worked out in the end. I actually had to stop the camera in the middle because I'm using a clamp to hold it up on one of my joists on my basement, so I had to stop it early just to use an extra clamp. And here I'm doing some planing on the outside, and I ended up sharpening before this and it went a lot better. Got a little bit of tear out on the darker of the two plies, but I ended up sanding it out, so it wasn't too bad. Once I had them flat, I brought it over to the jointer and I squared one of the edges to get a reference point for the flat side of the push block. Then I used my handle off of that plane I told you about to create the handle, and then I just drew out the rest of the shape that I wanted, just the relative shape that I wanted, so I can carve it out on the bandsaw. So this step was pretty self-explanatory. I just brought it over to the bandsaw once it was all drawn out, and I carved out the basic shape. It did take a little longer than I thought just because I have a thicker blade on my bandsaw right now, so it isn't as easy to cut curves as it normally would be. Then once it was carved out, I brought it back over to the bench and drilled a hole where the handle needs to go, and then just used the jigsaw to carve out the rest of the excess. And then after that, it was probably a solid hour of shaping. I'm just using a needle file here, and that's how I actually started the shape of the handle and the finger scallops. And then after that, I just did a lot of sanding. So I'm putting a round over here on the corners just to give it a smoother shape. I did all of the corners except for the handle because I wanted to kind of customize that more myself with the shaping tools that I had. So this is just a really quick clip of me sanding, but there was a lot more involved in this. I just used my orbital to sand down to 320. Then once that was done, it was all smooth. I brought it to the table saw to cut off a small section all the way down to the end and stopped, and then just used a handsaw, as you can see here, to cut off the rest to give it that little heel that it needs to grab onto material as you're pushing it through the saw. Then once it was off, I just used a plane here to smooth it out because of the saw curve. It kind of roughed up the edge a little bit. And then just finished off shaping the heel with a chisel there at the end. Pretty sure this is what you've been waiting on, but look how that finished, man. I'm just using your basic blonde shellac here, like I use for pretty much everything, but it's a 1 pound cut, so it's a little bit thinner, and I used a couple coats of that, a little bit heavier on the edges and the end grain just because it soaks up a little more. But that is about it, and then I buffed it down with just a clean rag after that, just to sort of smooth everything out. But it looks great. I'm really happy with how it turned out. Once I had it all prettied up, I ran it through a test, and it is working as intended. So there you go. That's how it all came together. I just wanted to say thank you for watching and being patient with my janky setup. This is all just done in my basement, and this is all very new to me. So stick with me, and it'll only get better from here, right? If you have any suggestions, I will do my best to read the comments. Let's be honest, there's not many right now, so it won't be that hard. So let me know if you have any ideas of things that you'd like to see in the future, and I will do my best to show that to you. Until then, make some cool stuff, and I'll talk to you soon.